Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Erica.
Hi there. How
Been
are
a
you?
while.
It has. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
I am gonna get going in just a moment, but you know how it is. Folks wait until the last possible second. So we've got quite a few people coming through at the moment. So I'm gonna give it about 2 minutes and we'll get started. Welcome everyone. We're gonna get started in just a minute. Got quite a few people joining us. Great. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Men Building Social Trust Across Race and Gender, a bridging, bonding, and building conversation honoring the role and impact of men. I'm Erica Merritt, Vice President of Getting to We, and I'll be your host for tonight's conversation. I'm so glad that you all are here and have taken the time to join us. As we get started, I want to invite you to just take a moment, and you all are already doing this actually, but if you haven't already done so, want to invite you to say hello in the chat, tell us who you are, and tell us where you hail from. All right. We are extremely thrilled to host our very first virtual men's bridging, bonding, and building conversation. These conversations are really about creating space for real dialogue, strengthening gender solidarity, and moving us closer to racial and gender equity, especially in the places in which we work, we live, we serve, we play, and worship. Your presence matters. So whether you are dropping comments in the chat along the way, asking questions, or simply taking the time to listen closely and carefully, we appreciate you making the choice to join us tonight. We also want to invite you to join our community. We have a goal of doubling our newsletter subscribers. And so the best way to stay connected to Getting to We and to know what we're up to is to subscribe to our newsletter. If she hasn't already, Leah will be dropping a link in the chat so that you can easily sign up. We promise not to clog your inbox. We will just be sharing tools and resources and other things along those lines to support you and us in moving this work forward. And we thank you in advance for spreading the word. Remember along the way, if you have questions, to just drop those in the chat. There will come a point after the panel conversation that the group will be taking questions. And so I will be keeping an eye on the chat along the way. So by all means, whenever that question comes up for you, feel free to drop it in the chat and I will grab those and compile those for our panelists and for that Q&A part of our evening together. If you haven't already, I want to encourage you to make yourselves comfortable and to cozy up. Grab a beverage if you like. I have my evening decaf here, ready to go. And I want you to think about this as getting to We's virtual living room. And you're getting to be a part of a really amazing conversation. Before I hand things over, I want to acknowledge that I'm going to call them hot topics. That's probably an understatement. But there are so many things swirling around male identity. And many of those things, many of those narratives get in the way of our ability to really turn us and them into we. So there are narratives about men being under attack, about, stereotypes about men of color being um, a dangerous, backlash to conversations about toxic masculinity and all kinds of other conversations going on in online spaces that really just amplify that anger. All of these narratives are shaping the environment in which we find ourselves. Now, our panelists, that could be a multi-day conference, right, to explore those very things. And our panelists may not touch on all or maybe any of them, but those are the things that part of what makes conversations like this one so very important and so very needed in order for us to be able to move beyond division and toward trust and connection. Now for the very best part. We are so thrilled to have this conversation with Dr. Jason Johnson, with Juan Almador, with Evan Richard, and Greg Deegan. Their bios and their websites are going to be in the chat if they aren't already. And all of them are extremely accomplished, and you're going to get so much out of hearing from them this evening. These are phenomenal men. Again, we are honored to have you here. We are honored to have them here, and we're going to dive in. So I am going to pass the proverbial mic over to you now, Jason.
Thank you very much. This is where I reach off screen and come back with a microphone for everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to just say a couple of things really quick before we go into introductions. We are at such a critical time in this country and in the world as a whole, and I can think of nothing better for us to be spending our time on than discussing the most essential of bonds. And I mean those bonds that have been frayed. And that primarily has to do with relationships between men of all ages, all races, and all genders. So I appreciate everybody joining us this evening. We're going to have a really fun conversation. If any of you all are remotely familiar with me, you know you have no idea what I may ask or what may come out of my mouth. So we're going to start with just a quick 1 or 2 sentence introduction from each one of our guests. Then I will introduce myself, and then we will get started. So we will begin with you, Greg Deegan. Tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, good evening. Thanks, Jason. And like I said in the chat, honored that you're joining us tonight. So I'm an educator, basically 30 years, high school social studies for 21 years, and then in the education nonprofit space for the last 9. So really excited to be here and listen to my fellow panelists to find out more about the ways we can do the bridging, building, and bonding.
Okay. And Juan Amador, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, buenas noches. Good evening. Juan Amador. I am an association executive. No one grows up to be an association executive in career day. That's how I landed. I have a history, a long history with DEI, and really I consider myself a product of mentoring. And in my day role, I lead a STEM organization that is called SACNIS, and we focus on producing more PhDs, more individuals that can go into higher level education or in industry, government, nonprofit. And I am so honored to be here.
And last but not least, Evan Richard.
Wonderful to meet you. Wonderful to see you again, Jason. Good to see so many familiar faces this evening. My name is Evan Richard. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. I'm now in Houston, Texas. I work at a law firm called Blank Rome. I oversee our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, and I'm actually a career DEI professional now that I've stopped into the term said by Juan. So it's the space that I've been in, the space that I've known. I'm really excited to bring some of that work here in a different platform. I'm in a conversation with you all tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And a little about myself. My name is Dr. Jason Johnson. I'm a professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. I also work as a host and analyst on MSNBC. I am a long-suffering Seattle Seahawks fan and a Pisces who likes long walks in the rain. So now that everybody knows me, we can get started. Now, there's a reason that we're having this conversation about friendship. I don't think it's just a matter of friendship, but I don't think that we can talk about the ways in which men need to sort of build relationships with each other if we don't talk about friendship first. Whether you are a straight man or a queer man, your first interactions with men outside of your family are probably going to be friendships because you don't have coworkers when you're four. So I want to start with any of our sort of guest panelists. Just talk first a little bit about, from your own personal experience, what is the first time you had a friendship or built a relationship with someone of another race or another color or faith? Greg, Evan, Juan?
I'm happy to start.
Yeah.
I was 5, and I only remember because it was a connection through a family friend, and it was either a fourth or fifth birthday party, and it was themed after the movie Flubber. I don't know if anyone remembers the movie with Robin
Wow.
Williams. Um, and we were the only two kids who had seen the movie before. And from 5 until probably I was around 18 years old, was probably one of the closest friends I had. He was his one of his parents was Catholic, his other parent was Jewish. I'm African American, he was white, but grew up together pretty much doing everything we could think of pretty much until high school. And even now in our older years, still stay in contact on birthdays, now wedding anniversaries. He's getting ready to have a child. But that one was kind of a built-in one in a very organic way.
Okay.
Well, I wish I could say the same, Evan, because most of my friends growing up were white. And in terms of good friends, I really did not white until I started teaching. And so it was a colleague, and then our sort of relationship grew very deep, just the experiences that we had. And we realized how much we enjoyed hanging out with each other, making each other laugh, and, sharing family stories and becoming a part of each other's lives. But for me, most of my life, it was sort of like on the periphery. Someone who didn't look like me was never really I was never really close with anyone who didn't look white.
Well, I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood, so I felt like everyone was my friend, and we grew up in a community where it's like we just went down the street and played with everyone. But to the question, I have to think about, and it wasn't probably until my first year of community college where I met my now best friend, Caucasian male. We met through a friend, and it was really the first time that I really began to talk about what's it like to be Hispanic, what's it like to talk Spanish, what's it like to, live in a neighborhood where it was, you know, lower to middle class economically, um, and really introducing myself to a different world. And just a really quick example, it's like I wouldn't shop at the Gap, but my friend would go to the Gap. And I was like, "What's the Gap?" And I was like, and he was like, "Come with me." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is a store that sells all jeans." I never knew it existed. And so, but over the years, I have to say that we have grown closely. And what brings us closer now than ever is a lot of shared values, and particularly right now of what's going on in the world.
So I love this because you all have such a sort of diverse collection, right? Of even how these sorts of friendships, some were work, some were professional, some were school, some were random because you were playing in the same sandbox, right? Because 9 times out of 10, we don't really know where our friendships are going to begin or where they come from. Going from that, statistically speaking, right? The vast majority of men in America do not count more than one, and most zero, have zero close friends who are of another race or another faith. But I want to dig deeper into that because I think there's something else going on before we even get to sort of the bridging the racial gaps, which is the idea of male friendship in general. And the idea that one of the roots to the sort of rise of the hard right and incel culture and many other problems that we see in society today stem from the fact that men don't make friends and do not retain friendships at the level and depth that most women do. So I want to ask our panel first, when you think about the friendships that you had, let's say in high school, or the friendships that you had in college, how many people from those eras in your life would you say you stay in contact with? And by stay in contact, I mean you communicate with them more than twice a year via phone.
I could say three. I
Okay.
real quick, three individuals that it gets daily contact actually for me. But again, what keeps us together is building a support system for each other. And so it's more of me texting sometimes at 1, 2 in the morning, like, "Hey, I can't sleep," and somebody will respond to say, "What's going on? What's keeping you up at night?" Other times it is just foolishness, just saying, just to make each other laugh. And we need laughter right now. And then the third thing I would say is just the familial. We've grown beyond just saying you're my best friend to your family.
Yeah.
Come on over for any holiday, or you're having a hard time. What can we talk about? Well, what resources can we share to get you through these times that are hard? Or it's always fun. Let's have fun together. So three is my magic number.
Okay.
I would say probably I'm still very close with a bunch of college friends, probably about four and then three from high school, and very close, like same one kind of depth of emotional connection and valence, there for each other in many difficult times and in great times. And those help to shape so much of like my confidence as an adult. So those are like absolutely essential to emerging into adulthood in a way that left me in a good place, I think.
And what about you, Evan?
I think I would say out front, I'm a bit of a social outlier in this respect. I've had the same best friend since I got on this earth. My first cousin and I are 7 days apart, so I've never had to wonder what male friendship really looked like. And I think as we started to kind of pre-phase and plan and talk about everything around here, I started to think about friendships a little more. And I've always replicated that friendship, what went into building it, making it sustainable, because you don't have to like your cousin. There's plenty of us on this call, I'm sure, who have a cousin we haven't spoken to in more time than we would care to say. But having that healthy, sustainable relationship, I apply to pretty much most of the relationships in my life. Am I being a a considerate friend here? Am I respecting his human dignity and his well-being? And so that I was able to really replicate across the board. And so I've had the same group of best friends too since high school. They were all my groomsmen. As I've grown as an adult, being able to share those values and kind of mirror myself to understand this is who this friend is, this is who I am, has allowed me to make adult friendships that really carry some of the same tenets and properties that I built from the same friendship with my first cousin. So I know that's typically not normally the answer, and now I've given two that probably aren't normally the case, but that's the friendship model, at least for me.
Okay. Hold 1 second. I just need the audience to hold for 1 second. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, so a couple of things. First, when we hear that those are sort of the different kinds of relationships people are able to build, people kind of maintain, and how those friendships sort of have lasted through different kinds and periods, we now want to get into this idea of how men in general are building or failing to maintain relationships, because that's one of the reasons that we're sort of seeing some of the challenges we are. That's why we're trying to sort of build these bridges. So I want to ask our panel, why do you think so many men struggle to maintain friendships, period, with other men, let alone men of other races? We'll get to that, but why do you think so many men struggle? Why do you think there are articles every other year, several times a year, about the death of male friendships, the dearth of male friendships, the lack of in-depth male friendships, and how that relates to everything from domestic violence to suicide, to crime and recidivism? Why do you all think that so many men struggle?
I can definitely start in terms of, I look at the way I grew up, and it's really my culture, in particularly a Hispanic male. I identify as Latino and Hispanic. That's where my family also self-identifies. And a lot of growing up was, you're the man, and you bond a certain way, you act a certain way, you dress a certain way, you represent the family in a certain way. And so it really does, my culture really did shape my experience with bonding with other men. It was very much of much more of like, yeah, we're friends, but we're also competitors. Or yeah, we can be acquaintance, but I really don't know you until I know your family. Or it's like we just don't like each other, therefore we're not going to be friends. But ultimately, I come back to my experience has been at the center of it has been my mother. She was always saying, we have a saying, you tell me who your friends are, I'll tell you who you are. And so, with growing up with that mantra, it was very much be careful of who you make friends. And when you do make friends, they have to reflect our community, family values, and definitely to get you ahead in life.
Greg?
It's so interesting. I joined this year kind of stupidly. I'm 55. I joined this hardball league, and the guys on this team, it was like such a bro culture. And it just felt like, to me, in my experiences with men, the easy thing is to do an activity, not ever talk about the experiences that you are feeling. Deep relationships, it feels like that is an effort, and that I think that the individuals that I bonded with I bonded because of some trauma or just rough things that people were going through that sort of break through that. So it feels to me like it's easier not to ever go there, which means that then those friendships never develop in ways that are worth continuing.
Yeah, I
Evan?
think Greg touched on two really important parts of one, the experiences. I think both Juan and Greg have mentioned experiences. Just what you experience in life, you're going to view as being normal, ordinary, or just custom. I think the other one with men, I'm learning at least now having a godson who's 4 all the way up to older relationships is there's a lot of nuance to just human development in general, but most of the time for men, you're being asked to cut short straight through the fact, don't get into the minutia of things. But if you don't if you don't really kind of categorically channel that to where it's important, you start to apply that to every part of your life. So you skip through the nuances of how I'm feeling about something. You skip through the nuances of where I'm struggling with something. How do I communicate this? And you get to what you know, what you're comfortable with, what your experiences have showed you gets rewarded, gets acknowledged, and you pretty much make your life off of kind of that heuristic. And if the heuristic isn't really a well-rounded one that helps you be an effective individual, eventually you meet a point where the group that's around you stop being friends with you because the values that you share no longer are really in existence, and you just kind of go inward. And I think we're seeing a lot of that with men across racial dimensions, and really across just dimensions of difference, period. But I do think it goes into your experiences and then just kind of how well you can really balance the nuance that's really life.
So, going further with that, this idea that these are supposed to be people who either contribute to your life or provide something, right? Juan talked about the fact that his family said, well, if you're going to be friends with these people, do they contribute or do they work with you in life? Or Greg saying, these are the guys who help you in sports, et cetera, et cetera. What were you taught as men about what you're supposed to contribute in friendships? Because oftentimes part of the difficulty that all people have in relationships is everybody knows how to take, but learning how to contribute, and whether that contribution is emotional, whether that contribution is time, whether that contribution is financial, those are struggles that people often face. So, and I'm listening. Hold one moment. I have to close my thing. Okay.
I was lucky. Juan mentioned, having a mentor. I had a mentor who gave me the book, The Friendship Game. And as I was a high school kid, he's like, you should read this. It will help you to develop relationships that will be worthwhile. So I had some really important people in my life who helped to guide me. And that was really key. And also remind me that being fully human meant having sort of a range of emotions that were really important, and that propelled me to meet people that were not like me.
And Evan?
Yeah, I think again, just kind of hearing some of your questions, I'm thinking of it kind of live. My father's on this call, and he actually just would say this to me growing up. The first one was that you leave the party with whoever you came there with, and if you shouldn't, if you didn't want to be at the party with that kind of person, then you need to evaluate what kind of person they are. And I just kind of broadly took that on and throughout my life, where if I have a certain loyalty to a friend because of values we've shared, experiences that we've shared, and a testament I can make to their character, that's the person that I'm going to continue to live and grow my life with. And if it's someone that character and value comes into question, I'm not going to stop to really think through if this is a continued relationship that's worthwhile pursuing. It might just not be anymore for that season, or it might be for the duration of our lives. But I kind of just take those two pieces kind of broadly into most of my relationships.
And Juan?
Yeah, so I'm going to say and share that it's always been you support the community. And again, it's just again because I grew up in a small neighborhood, and my mom knew our neighbors, and so we had to take care of each other, and so that meant always, take care of each other, but also be there for each other, and then help each other grow. And so part of that has always been translated to, if I think about it, from elementary to high school to being a grown up. And then I look at my job now and what I do and how does that play out. It really is always fostering community support, fostering resources for the community, being an advocate for the community, or being there for my mentees. I would have never thought I would now would have three mentees. I was like, when did I become the mentor? It's like, but I think about it, and I was like, well, that's part of who you've been. It's like you always give back, and that's just something ingrained in me, I guess, and it just comes naturally. And I'll say, even as we are talking about this
You're not going to be able to stay in
and
here.
thinking about how to answer these questions very timely and lively, I have to say, even just being here today, being present here today is like sharing, giving back to the community, and hopefully helping some of us that are on this call in some way, shape, or form.
Hold 1 second. We're running into a slight complication here, so I'm going to put myself on pause. I know that we're about to head into the Q&A section, so if I could ask for Erica to sort of take over this for just 1 second, and I will get myself sort of rearranged. I just want to make sure all of that is set, and we can continue the flow of the conversation. Hold one moment.
I'm happy to do that. I am going to ask you all, we'll be taking questions that are dropped into the chat. So if you have questions that you want to ask, please drop them into the chat. What questions do you have for the panelists? I echo Juan's, don't be shy. Oh, interesting. So Walter is asking if there is a physical meeting dialoguing group here in Northeast Ohio. So I know only Greg is the only one who's currently in
Hey,
Northeast
you.
Ohio. So I think that one's for you, Greg.
Well, I don't know the answer to the question. I can tell you that I joined a larger group called White Men for Racial Justice, WMRJ, started by two teachers, and have gone through it's a national cohort. And there's actually a couple of Guardians employees who have started a group called Aspiring Allies that I'm a part of now. And we are starting sort of a WMRJ local. So I don't honestly know, Walter, whether or not there is in the Cleveland area, but I know that we are starting to have conversations about having regular sort of monthly meetings by people who want to continue conversations. So that's the only one that I know of.
Awesome. Thank you. And if others who are with us in the conversation, groups that are meeting locally, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a question.
I don't know how
Oh,
familiar everyone on the call is with Third Space in Cleveland, Ohio. It's
oh
right off
yeah.
105th, but I mean, I'm a little biased. I think they're great, but nonetheless, great physical meeting space, and they have a number of conversations across topics. I think the most recent series that I really liked and was able to tune into have been their intergenerational dialogues. So just kind of getting to hear different perspectives, not only across the city, but also across the different age ranges in the city too, was interesting to both learn about and then also learn from.
Awesome. Great resource. So I'll ask, and I think assuming she's still here, I think Evelyn is with us. So maybe she can drop a link to Third Space in the chat, or Leah can take a moment to do that as another resource. Okay. We have another question about what aspects of friendship do you believe? Okay, now they're moving fast. Wait 1 second, I lost it. What aspects of friendship do you believe you missed over the years as close relationships have evolved into their current state? So what do you think maybe you've missed, if anything?
I was gonna say, I don't know that I've never stopped really long enough to think of if I've missed any. I think the one that only comes up for me, I used to be a college athlete and I cut that short and to have a fuller college experience. So there are times every now and again where I think of what would it look like to have continued on in collegiate athletics and professional athletics overseas, and seeing what forming friendships truly across waters could have been like. But outside of that, I feel like I've had a really full and enriching life.
Yeah,
Thank
I'll say I don't think I've missed a whole lot. I mean, I shared that I have like probably three close friends, but I think uh, I'm okay with that. I don't think I've missed out. I think that those individuals are the right individuals to support me. But I also think about it in the way as like, where have I cut out friends? Like, we've been friends and then I've let them go because of priorities change or friendships change or lifestyle decisions have changed. And also, I'm okay with that. As an adult now, I'm like, I have to spend my time and energy in a group of friends where they foster or help foster my success, or being there emotionally, or again being there just to move on with life and really having some fun.
Yeah, thank you. When you all, so we've been talking very much at a personal level, about your own individual experiences. When you kind of think about more of like a 500-foot view of some of these dynamics around either relationships between men, across a variety of different dimensions of diversity, or thinking about relationships across gender and so on. What are you think some of the implications at a societal level of these things that we've been talking about at a personal level? Because we know systems and are always playing a role as well. This isn't, and the interpersonal piece is essential, right? But it's not a complete picture.
I think Jason wound up bringing up Greg wound up bringing up a really interesting point at the beginning where he talked about physical distance. He was just discussing through college that was and then well into work. That was the first time he was able to develop a relationship across racial differences. And I have a colleague. We wound up actually bringing her to our firm for a presentation, and the entire conversation was around building relationships across differences. And she talked about relationship building on a societal level and really used Maslow's hierarchy of needs to kind of frame it. And so, Erica, to your very first part, the very first thing she talked about was the interpersonal lived experiences and how they vary. But what they do, depending on what system we're specifically looking at, it can either create an inequity or it can create inequity. And typically, a lot of times, we see a lot of systemic inequities in just the most recent current events that we're experiencing. But those come from a place at that interpersonal level, and the chasm kind of widens if you think about that Maslow's hierarchy triangle from that systems level. But it's really only like four or five other points that are actually needed on the triangle. But because that gap is so wide with the systemic issues, you see the just reality that's going to take time to actually build relationships. But if you're not willing to overlook some of the lived experiences that you have, you're not going to commit that time. You may have had disagreements at some point in the past that have informed those experiences. But if you don't actually get the opportunity to kind of bridge some of those differences, and that comes in with the physical proximity, then you're never actually getting real life repetitions to see how do I begin to mend this specific kind of relationship versus another. And you're just continuing to live off of assumptions. And those assumptions fuel the system. The system keeps working its hand as well. And so it's a self-perpetuating issue that I think a lot of it at its core, it really just can start with the authentic reality. I'm different than you, you're different than me. Those differences, while they don't create any superiority or inferiority, they do deserve some recognition and value. And I think the more that we get the opportunity to have spaces like this where we can proximately speak with one another about them, that's kind of the start and how it festers and permeates to the larger circles that we're all a part of.
Thank you, Evan.
I really appreciate that, Evan. The distance. So a lot of the work that Teach in Cleveland does is to basically ask questions about what the history of Northeast Ohio has been, so that we understand the community that we've inherited. And when you talk about distance, we do so much around the legacies of redlining. And I know really, lovely people who just have never had any experiences with people who are different. And so a lot of what we do is to center those participants, whether they're in corporations, nonprofits, educators, to have conversations about like their childhood growing up, not unlike Jason, the way he prompted us to start. And to so often we live our lives and we're not aware of so many things that could bind us if we just took some time to have those conversations. And I really think it's those sort of bonding conversations that begin an exploration. And where we are today and the answers and what it means for individuals today is up to those participants. But sort of forcing that conversation about sort of shared experiences seems to be a part of what seems to be a special sauce that people enjoy about our workshops. So I don't know if that, but it's bridging huge gaps and huge inequities that we've inherited.
Mm. I can say, just building upon what Greg is saying, for me in my organization that I'm currently at is building community. So we're moving from, everything I've shared has been on an individual basis, but now with this question, I think about the community. And what does that mean? I work in the science, technology, engineering, math environment. And in most organizations, you have to present yourself a certain way, you have to come a certain way. But for us, I think of, okay, can I leave my language at the door? Or can I leave my culture at the door? You know, can I leave something and not bring it to work or bring it to the environment that I'm trying to create? The answer is no for me, at least. And so creating community for us and my organization means that you bring your whole self. You bring whoever you are. You're Black, Hispanic, Native American, Caucasian, Pacific Islander, male, female. Um, the way that you introduce yourself, if you're they, them, where that's part of the community. That's part of why we need to build community. And particularly, again, in the environment that we're in, we tend to look for where we can go and be safe, psychologically safely, physically safely, coming back to the Maslow's hierarchy. And so being part of a community for me is so important. And creating those communities, whether they're virtual or in person, at a conference, one on one, that's just key. It's something that I really value.
Thank you all for that. I just want to share with the panelists and you, the audience, that Jason is having some space issues and he's doing his best to be able to rejoin us. I want to keep us kind of at this higher level and think of some of the political narratives that are swirling at this moment. We started to talk about um, kind of what the implications are of these interpersonal relationships at the societal level. When you all think about some of the messaging about sort of men as victims, particularly white men as victims in this time, I'm curious, you know, what are you thinking about? And then how is that showing up and operating in the spaces in which you are each doing your work? So there's like personal thoughts, but then there's actual impact. And what are you seeing? I know some there's professional organizations represented here, law firm, nonprofit, and so thinking about it both personally and also institutionally. Just a little question.
Yeah, I know we're gonna solve it together. Well, if I could jump in, then I'll tell you.
Please.
Personally, let me just share that. And this is Juan Amador talking. I respect when someone says, I'm being penalized or I'm being, personally attacked. Listening, of course. but I don't prescribe to that as 100% because I tend to, my perspective is I tend to look at society and who's most attacked. And that is really a lot Black women or women of color. And in my role, whether it's a personal role or a professional role, I see myself as now having the opportunity to raise my voice and say, you know, this is wrong, or this can't continue. This is an injustice, you know, or help bring in to remove barriers, bring in resources to remove barriers. At an organizational level, I could tell you that my organization is feeling like we are under attack. No matter what you look like, but the fact that the narrative has changed and we cannot even say DEI, much less write it, whether it's in, you know, a plenary, a grant application to teach, to select a book. That just feels very personal to attacking not just one community, but many communities that are outside, that don't look Caucasian, that don't have the same religion, you know, that don't have the same values. And so it is a struggle right now. And what I'll close with saying is, you know, whether it's again my friends or myself or the community, we are hurting, and so part of this dialogue here is to, you know, help come together and understand, at least from my perspective, what can I do to support.
Thank you, Juan. Greg or Evan?
Yeah. I mean, as a white guy, I mean, I check off all the dominant, you know, when you think about intersectionality, I check off all the dominant things. I'm white, I'm Christian, I'm cisgendered, I'm able-bodied, and I feel a particular responsibility to do the work by showing the evidence. You know, when we talk about history, when we talk about the GI Bill and who received loans, like you can center those individuals at the start of a conversation and talk about what it was like, where'd you grow up, and what was your family's sort of narrative about who succeeds in this country. And then when you show America in the last 67 years, like it's pretty clear, you know, so we spend a lot of time showing, you know, sort of the legacies of inequities that we've inherited. And so for us, we try really hard to just be like, look, this is what it looks like. And you can do the yeah buts all you want, but it's really clear. So I feel very compelled and responsible to be a voice to say that that sort of assertion can be dismantled very quickly. And so we do that as regularly as possible, and try to root it in history and people's lived experiences and have individuals share what it has meant to be, in this case, in Northeast Ohio, and to be a part of these vast inequities.
I think it's one of the challenges, kind of like a double-edged sword of sorts, is to build relationships, you have to have trust. And in order to really foster trust with someone, you have to have some type of sustained relationship. And one of the challenging things I think that we're seeing right now is where there's really a lack of trust across a number of levels, whether it's institutional, organizations, interpersonal relationships, whatever it may be. And I think one of like the anchors to it is accountability. When you look at relationships across the board, you're looking for relationships that allow you to have trust, that you know are going to be accountable, and at that last part, that are really going to provide growth or put you in the seat to be a leader to promote growth. And I think from unfortunately the top level of this country right now, we're seeing a lack of the three. And kind of the widespread issue, once we look at it from a longitudinal standpoint, is what kind of individuals are those going to raise? Or is it going to raise individuals who see, well, the best way that I saw to get ahead was by being backhanded, by doing however you want to categorize it. And the unfortunate part is some people may latch on to that, and there's others who will do the contrary, you hope. But I think that's the worry that I know I have at this moment. I have friends and family who are birthing the next generation, and I constantly worry between the things they see, the things they hear, big picture, long term, what kind of person is it going to develop them into? And you worry in this climate because the probability seems lower for them to have some of the great values that probably connect most of us who are on this call tonight. So I think those are the kind of the three big things that we have to focus with in developing relationships, regardless of the political climate that may be going on. How do you foster trust? How do you instill and sustain accountability between each other and ultimately grow? We're all here to figure out how to get to we together. How do you grow into that collective as opposed to that individualistic mindset?
You know, I have a complex relationship with this word that I'm about to use, but I'm going to use it nonetheless. And that word is hope. And I think about, there's a phrase around like hokey hope, which is that kind of like, we're just hope everything's gonna get better. Or we kind of offer kind of empty platitudes. There's another frame of critical hope that takes into account the reality in which we are living, but maintains a sense that something else is possible. And so I wonder for the three of you, in the midst of our current reality, is hope something that you have? And if it is, then what is it grounded in for you? And sort of what are examples that you are seeing around you of the what is possible when we think about moving, advancing racial equity, um, gender solidarity, all of these big concepts?
I think as terrible as some of the realities going on around us happen to be, one of the most encouraging ones, it's not really that encouraging. I guess this is taking an optimistic view of it. Um, some of the examples that we've seen just in this last year, is that no one person or no one institution can save us as a community. And so I've seen a lot of great examples of people figuring out how do I build community in place of that? If I won't find that assistance from an institutional level, is there a way in my own neighborhood, like the neighborhood I live in, it's similar to Cleveland, where Opportunity Corridor is. Ours is called Emancipation Corridor. And some of the big projects that have been going on along Emancipation Corridor have been community gardens. And just we see people throughout the neighborhood who are figuring out how do I grow and contribute this so that this resource is available to you. Technically, where I live is a food desert. There's a grocery store close to my end, but it's a large ward, so it's the only one that's here. And so I think seeing that and people really wrapping their arms around the reality, I do have a charge with taking care of my neighbor, taking care of my neighborhood, and hoping that it kind of cascades to higher levels. I think that's been, while an unfortunate reality that no one's coming to save us, it's good to see that people are embracing that challenge and figuring out how to do so collectively.
Thank you, Evan.
Hope it comes and goes depending on the day. Today I have some, tomorrow I may not have some. But working in higher ed, what really gives me hope is that there is a next generation coming right behind us, behind many of us, and that generation needs to also embrace what's happening. And so, what can I do about it? Um, I come back to how do I best support students? You know, is it by funding students? I have to fundraise. And why is that critical? Because someone needs to present their research. Someone needs to become a scientist or the next engineer that's going to invent the next version of a new phone or some new technology that we haven't even thought about. I think about the next leaders. Key decisions are made by leaders, and I want them to look like me. I want them to aspire to lead not only at the highest level in government, but also in industry, in education. I want a person to be the dean of an enterprise, whether it's a medical school or a professional school. Um, Students give me hope. I think, and they're vocal about what they need, and listening to them and listening to, what they aspire to be is something that I focus on, because if I focus on everything that is going wrong, that's where I get into like there is no hope, and there is plenty of hope we just have to harness that and know that, again, we're a community, and we have to seek where we can help each other and move that hope into change.
Juan, I second that for sure. We have a program, our student challenge, where we typically will have 50 to 60 area students, and it is all about centering them, giving them a voice, giving them a sense of empowerment, giving them the ability to share with each other across municipalities, and they give me hope. When you give high school kids the opportunity to share their ideas and to listen to other people, like it's really incredible. Because right now I often feel despondent with what you see in social media, right? It's really it's very difficult. But high school kids, and we work a lot also with teachers to basically decenter teachers in the classroom and to center students and give them a voice in the classroom as well. So I would love to say that that is making a difference, because we want them to emerge feeling like they know adults, they have been given opportunities to have a voice. And so that gives me an incredible amount of hope. And I think the other thing in terms of being, a nonprofit in Northeast Ohio, there's a guy named Seth Kaplan who wrote a book called Fragile Neighborhoods, and he talks about the need about collaborating sort of horizontally, not vertically, gathering other like-minded individuals in building a sense of community and purpose around some really important shared goals. And that has been something that we hold to, and that gives a lot of hope. There are such incredible people doing such incredible work at the local level, and that you hope that that will then continue on to larger systems and beyond.
There are just a couple of questions in the chat I want to grab before we start to move towards closing out. One is about when you are putting out historical information, how do you or other data, right? How do you manage the yes, but that you often get back, and the defensiveness that often surfaces when you present that accurate historical information? And I think all three of you are probably doing that in different ways. So any of you could feel free to respond. How do you manage the yes buts?
Right now, for me, it's legal. It's really right now engaging legal counsel, because historically, even in my previous organization, collecting data, trend data, reporting it out, sharing it to the public, how to use that data to make impact or either develop a new program, enhancing an existing program, identifying community needs. Right now, I was like, the but is uh, this is not important, or the but is we're going to make sure you don't continue collecting data because you're using it in a certain way. And so that legal piece for me right now is like being very clear of yes, I collected data, my organization collects data, this is how we use it, this is how we report it out, and you always have the option of not answering. So that is very hard right now because, looking at it from a health perspective, for addressing health equity, you want to know what the community is facing, what diseases do we need to attack. For developing vaccines, we need to know. It's just hard right now to think about that. We're in the position that we have to defend research, evidence, and data.
Yeah, thank you for that. That feels really important to seek legal help in this moment when there's so much confusion as well, right? A lot of the sort of binding or things that are barring folks from doing this really important work in their organizations is vague. And so often there's misinformation about what you can or can't do, and just a lot of confusion around that. So thank you for that. There's another question around whether or not any of you have been actively discouraged by close members of your family or your social networks at work over the years from develop or at work over the years from developing friendships or associations with others that were different from you, whether that was tied to gender or race. And how did you manage it?
Mm.
Uh, I I have to tell you, I don't think I manage it very well. So if I'm being totally honest, I've had either explicit or implicit encouragement. Um, Family members who are like, basically, what are you like? What are you doing? It's this sort of like the questions we're answering or trying to ask, don't have much value. And a lot of what we're doing is trying to have these honest conversations. So, and there are times where I stumble, and there are times that I feel like, I've given someone some insights into why I think it's so important. But I'll be honest with you, it always feels like I don't know that I made any real difference in that conversation.
Thank you, Greg. Evan,
Uh,
any? Oh, Jason.
Greetings, everyone. I want to apologize immensely for the technical difficulties that I ran into and the multiple things I had to do to return to this conversation. I trust, seeing as how all the same squares are here, that nothing terrible has happened while I was gone. I just want to make
I
sure
got to
that
play the role of Dr. Jason Johnson, so the audience will have to tell me how I did later.
It's a complicated role. Trust me, I haven't mastered it in over 40 years. Uh, I appreciate. I want to make sure that we're continuing with the flow. I've been keeping sort of touch and in track of the conversation. I just wanted to make sure because I don't know that we had gotten to this particular point. We were talking about sort of the impact of the sort of bridges and bonding and male relationships, how it affect politics. Had we gotten to the point of the conversation where we're discussing what has occurred in the last week to week and a half? Because I wanted to make sure that we had sort of an in-depth conversation about how the role of deepening and valued relationships between men across races can help us sort of steer in our current conversations. Have we touched upon that yet?
We've talked about the political climate, but we have not talked specifically about the last week, Jason.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I just want to lay this out to people in the context of what's not just happening in our country politically, but what's happening in our country rhetorically over the last week. Obviously, there was a tremendous tragedy. On the same day, you had high school students getting shot in Colorado. You had a prominent conservative alt-right political leader get killed at the same time. You had a gunman at the Naval Academy, and then sort of subsequent violence in sort of the last couple of days. But what I think is key in relation to what we've been discussing this evening is the role that different kinds of men and men of different races can play in sort of directing the rhetoric of this country right now. So I want to ask Greg, I want to ask Juan, I want to ask Evan, tell us a little bit about some of the conversations you've had with men, friends, colleagues, family members about what's been happening in our country over the last week and how you've sought to sort of either build bridges or at least find understanding in a moment where a lot of people seem to only want to talk about one part of the story.
Big question. I can share that in particular for this week, there's a lot of blame in my conversations, formal and informal, have focused around who is the blame, and for some reason, why is it communities of color that are getting blamed or getting attacked or getting singled out? Regardless of what's happening. The second thing has been focused around ethics. It's like we live by moral code, religious codes, our own personal values, but it just seems like there is no ethics from not only from this current administration, but when you look at systems, that are supposed to protect us, Supreme Court, judges, police, Department of Justice, centers that monitor health, CDC, for pandemics. Those things are just gone and it's kind of like, are we really going to have another incident where we're losing more lives? And for my circle and my conversations, that equates to lives within our communities of color predominantly. And so those are the two major things this week I could share with you all. That it has been heavy.
Evan?
Yeah, I think I was having part of this conversation yesterday. And I mean, obviously, people are going to have emotions and feelings about things that are going on, and that's always going to steer opinions. I think it's always important to stay at the heart of what really any issue is. If there's an inequity that exists or there's an inequitable system at work, the more conducive conversation to me is let's discuss that and let's discuss our individual contributions to rectifying some of the horrors that we're seeing. The same week this assassination occurs, a young man at Delta State is found hung from a tree. It's so there's still a number of horrendous things that are occurring in this world. I think lately with socialization just kind of far too often. And then if we wanted to, we could spend our time getting caught up and swept up in the emotions of that piece day in and day out. But the system itself that's causing the issue is still in place. And I'm just kind of at a place in my young life so far where I would much rather steer the conversation towards uprooting some systemic inequity and issue as opposed to saying this person did this, that person did that, and I'm going to feel this way about it, only for us to still be at the exact same place where the conversation started.
Um, I engage. One of my closest cousins he excuses his stuff, and I'm constantly reaching out. Tell me, how can you? So to me, it's about humanizing this other side. The reality is, in the world that I have known for a long time, white men, the white men. There are some white men I know who, if they don't want to engage in this, it doesn't affect them. And so, what do you do? But continue to have a conversation that humanizes the victims and what is going on systemically, and doing the same to them and me. So I find it's a constant like battle to stay kind of, Evan, what you're saying, in the conversation, to take away the worst impulses of everybody in the conversation. And so and this last week has just been awful to try to continue to do that. That doesn't slip into the finger pointing like Juan was talking about, et cetera, the blaming, et cetera. But centering and humanizing these individuals and trying so hard to then demand that right back, reciprocity of humanity, I think is so important.
I think another element to this, and I want to hear all your sort of thoughts on this, is that while we don't understand, we don't, and we may not even trust the investigation, but while we don't understand the motivations behind the shooter, we can understand the words and the motivations and the behavior behind at least the victim. And much of the support for conservative movements in this country over the last 20 to 25 years have been driven by men of all colors, driven by young Asian men, Latino men, African American men who are attracted to messages that to them appear to be about empowerment, uh, gaining their place in a society that no longer respects men, gaining a certain amount of dominance sort of over women. And we hear many discussions about what toxic masculinity or versions of it may be doing to a younger generation. When you are interacting with men of different kinds and different races, how do you bring those conversations to the fore? Because from an empathetic standpoint, there are lots of young men who feel that they don't have friends, they don't have career prospects, they are not being validated by women, and therefore they're attracted to extremist movements. How do you sort of address that in your relationships with men, or working or personal?
I think it can just be a challenge in everyday life because it's two sides to a coin. I think on
Right.
one hand, one of the things that we're seeing, and as part of the conversation I was referencing, to your last question, you see a number of men today, and again across a dimension of difference, whose entire identity is built around this. It's a farce, but that I'm inherently better because I'm a man. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter any other dimension of difference. I'm better because society says men are better. When that house of cards falls, because it always is going to, and you don't have something to fall back on, then you're left with the other side of the coin to wonder, well, then what constitutes my manhood? What goes into me building and being a man? And I think Greg and Juana both spoke on it in a really clear way of there's a level of values that really constructs that man, and those values deliver some of the things that people recognize as this is a man who I would want to look up to, follow, work with, whatever the situation and case may be. But there's it same concept, but Betty Friedman talked about this concept before with the feminine mystique that like in like the late 60s, early 70s, there was this phenomenon that women were angry and no one could understand why they were just angry. Now you're seeing almost what is the masculine mystique of men are angry, but we can salient point to why exactly that is, but there's a number of men I think who refute that claim, and it's well, I'm just a man's man, and it's like that also is it's just not as accurate as you're thinking, and so I think a good part of it is to try to, and where the building relationships piece comes in, is to remind people that you're not your inadequacies or deficiencies no more than you're just the things that make you wonderful to the world as well. And I think a number of men need to hear that and need to consistently hear it and also hear the same message of, and just because you are this, that doesn't mean that you have a superiority to anyone else, whether it's an actual value or something that has no value at all.
Juan, Greg.
So, I personally, the way I bring this up or address it, it's more on a personal basis, is I try to be a role model. I try to be the best of what anyone within my community or outside my community would look to and be attracted to in terms of conversations, in terms of opening opportunities, whether it's, I always give this example in particular is like, I don't invite my partner or I don't invite families when I get invited to events because, one, they're going to be bored, but I use those opportunities to open doors for other individuals. So when I'm invited to a gala, why would I bring my mentee? Because that person needs to be in that room to observe a certain activity, who's in the room, how to interact, and how to take away to that experience to grow. The other thing I try to do is very, very clear about conversations. What are your barriers? You know, let's talk about your barriers and then identify someone who can help remove those barriers or even just talk to you about how they personally remove barriers. And one thing that's going on right now is financial barriers. Um, you know, just the fact that Pell Grants are going away or the student parent loans are going away. We depend on those systems in order to get through higher ed. So now, what are we going to do? We have to look for private funding. Uh, are we going to work 2 to 3 jobs to get us through school? Are we going to manage debt better? And the last thing I'll say is in terms of sponsoring. It has become huge for me in terms of, you know, um, do I need to do everything? No, but I can tell you, you need to go to Jason or you need to go to someone else. Say this is the right individual that can help you and move the conversation, address barriers, or just listen and give you some guidance and advice.
Greg.
And I would just add a couple things. One, to emphasize what Juan was talking about. It's about relationships. So, like for us with our high school kids, it's funny. The internet is not real life in so many ways. In so many ways, of course, we know it has a major impact. But when kids are together in these cohorts in the Student Challenge, or when we're doing tours, we're doing place-based experiences. These kids are doing amazing things, and they're bonding, and they're having these great experiences. Now, it could be that they're going home and posting awful things online. I don't know. But I can say that those experiences and providing those experiences seem to be maybe an antidote. And the other thing I would say is like there are incredible organizations, like Juan was saying, like mentor organizations and really great groups that work with young people that if Teaching Cleveland is doing our job well, we're making sure that both teachers and kids know about those groups to tune into to sort of bind us together more. So that's sort of our approach in trying to address it.
Uh, Thank you all so much for those in-depth answers. Miraculously, we have not solved the world's problems this evening, despite despite our attempts to do so. Nor have we magically healed all men. But I do think we have made some progress in the right direction. And to that end, I will hand things over to Erica, who played my doppelganger during my technical difficulties, and she will bring us to the close for this evening.
Awesome. Thank you all. Really, I think listening and being a part of this conversation this evening is so clear the complexity that's operating here, both at the interpersonal level, at the institutional level, and at the systems or societal level. And as much as we might desire to do so, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that building trust across racial lines, across lines of gender is challenging, necessary, right? And also challenging. And so we don't want to stop the conversation here. We're going to say, we'll take our conversation out of our virtual living room offline. So we want to give you some tools that you can use to keep the conversation going in your own corners of the world. And so we have some resources that we will share with you. Leah will be dropping a link to the Getting to We resource page in the chat. And you are going to get a follow-up email that will have a number of tools, including one called Swim on dry land that really gives you a framework for thinking about how you put the things that our panelists have been talking about tonight into practice. Again, how you build gender solidarity, how we move in the direction of advancing racial equity through building trust, right? Across these differences in these places where we live, work, play, and serve and worship. So at Getting to We, our goal is to continue creating experiences like this, conversations, resources, and other opportunities that help us grow what we call the Me to We webs web not website. It's getting late, y'all. The Me to We, the Me to We mindset. We do have a website, but that's not what I was trying to say. Our Me to We mindsets and build the skill sets that we need to transform the us and them into we. You can support that work by making, of course, a tax deductible donation and by continuing these conversations and by doing this work. And again, that link is in the chat. Just and spreading the word, right? Engaging other people in this work, forwarding the newsletter and other resources, having the tough conversations, right? And I know we have to manage our energy. We only have so much, but sometimes we have to tap into our courage and not let those little comments or other actions that are going on around us just slide by. And I saw in the chat someone talking about not wanting to sort of sit in this space of what's happening to our country, what has our country become, but actually doing something about it from the place in which they are sitting, not necessarily thinking about themselves as activists. I know Debbie often talk about happy activists, right? Doing this work from a place of love and care and a sense of possibility. I want to again thank Jason and Juan and Evan and Greg for being a part of this really rich conversation. I want to thank you all for your patience with our technical challenges this evening and for sticking with us. I'll also say a special thank you to Jason for your tenacity, right, in getting back to us. And we really hope that you leave this space with just a little more love and a little more grace and a lot more energy to keep building the future that we all deserve. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
I think it's just down to us now. Just a couple more.
Almost. Yes, I think it's just down to us.